This is
Make it plain.
Make it plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've said it many, many times how much I enjoy reading ProPublica and their great work. I hope you do as well. And there's another story out, a new story out we want to take a look at. It's very important when we look at things like this and the disproportionality of these circumstances. We always talk about law enforcement and criminal justice. But what about child welfare? The headline is from ProPublica: for Black families in Phoenix, child welfare investigations are a constant threat. And so joining us now, and you should mention that this piece was written in partnership with NBC News. Joining us now from ProPublica to talk about this matter is Agnell Phillip and Eli Hager. How are you both?
Doing well, thank you. How?
I'm doing well as well.
Okay, great. Great to have you both with us. Agnell, I'll start with you. What alerted you to this matter so that you could do a story in the first place?
So, and maybe Eli can provide some more details because he's been reporting on the child welfare system for a very long time. But there was a study last year done by researchers with Rutgers and Duke universities that tried to estimate essentially how prevalent child welfare investigations were among different racial groups. And what they found was that 63% of Black children in Maricopa County would experience a child welfare investigation before they turned 18, which is a shocking statistic. And I'll let Eli kind of talk more about, what the discussions were in the newsroom about pursuing that further. But we knew, number one, that we wanted to do our own analysis of the data to kind of learn a little bit more and also do some reporting to figure out exactly what the impact was of how pervasive these investigations were. I'll let Eli talk a little bit more about it.
Please, Eli, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what we really wanted to get across was the sheer pervasiveness of this problem and this system, right? I think sadly the notion that there would be a disparity between how often Black families are investigated by Child Protective Services agencies and white families due to racial bias and systemic racism wasn't the story itself. The story was just how common, just how pervasive, how ubiquitous these investigations are. The notion that 2 in 3 Black children in Phoenix, where I live, would go through a CPS investigation by the time they turn 18. We wanted to get across what a community-wide problem this is and how many people are affected by it and what they experience.
Your study shows that from 2015 to 2019, the last full year of federal child welfare statistics, that's 2019, available for the pandemic. From 2015 to 2019, Child Welfare Services investigated the family lives of 1 of every 3 Black children in Maricopa County, the most populous county in the state, and of course where Phoenix is. 1 out of every 3 Black children. Well, either one of you, what is that about? How did that come about? why is that so pervasive?
Well, that's what our investigation, we tried to get at some of what the causes are systemically, and there are a few. In some cases, it's just direct racial bias. The staff of many CPS agencies, including DCS, are mainly white and generally in their 20s and might not have experience with parenting. And so it might be their first job out of college. Often it's low paying and there's a lot of turnover. So the common situation is a a young white person without much experience making judgments, often relying on biases and prejudices about, whether what's going on in a household is in their view, dangerous for children. So there's some that are, just direct bias, but then there's also kind of the more systemic reasons, which is that Arizona, it's not unique in this way, but it takes a particularly kind of closed-fisted approach toward families who are struggling. The safety net here has been shredded. The main option for parents who are struggling with things related to poverty is to call DCS, which comes with the possibility of family separation attached to it, instead of kind of services for whatever issues they might be facing that don't come with the possibility of their children being removed. So these are a number of the things that we found that kind of have led to this very, very high rate of Black families being investigated, especially here, but really across the country.
You mentioned families reaching out to DCS, because that was my next question. How do they even come in contact with this agency? Agnel, so is it the case that when families are having trouble, even financially, they call the Department of Child Services and then that triggers an investigation?
So there can be a number of different ways that a family can get on DCS's or CPS's radar. There's a class of people called mandatory reporters that we covered a little earlier this year. But basically people who have to report, legally have to report when they suspect that child abuse or neglect is going on. So that includes teachers, that includes doctors. Those are a lot of the common ways that parents will have an allegation forwarded to CPS that they will then investigate. And, we covered that in that story, but, oftentimes in places where the social safety net maybe isn't as strong, or the services are not quite as available, a lot of times those mandatory reporters are just, reporting issues that they see that may not necessarily be, abuse on the part of the parent, but they don't really have anywhere else to turn. This is their legal responsibility, and this is what they're trained to do. And the outlet in places like Arizona for that is the Child Protective Services agency. So those are some of the ways in which parents can get on the radar. I'm not sure how often parents themselves are kind of reaching out for help and then end up in the throes of a CPS investigation. You kind of have this whole infrastructure surrounded around surveilling families, oftentimes poor families and families of color, that can get them embroiled in these sorts of investigations.
Eli, those who are doing mandatory reporting, why are they so focused on Black families?
Well, I mean, again, I think you have to chalk some of it up to just direct racial prejudice. It's hard to demonstrate, what's in people's minds when they're making decisions about whether to call the child CPS or whether to call the police. But for example, in our story, we highlighted the case of somebody named Nadia Richards. She moved from out of town to Phoenix, and within months of arriving here, she gave birth to her youngest daughter. And at the hospital, they performed a drug test on her baby, which it's not hospital policy to do that for all children. And the reasons why they did that to her are unclear. She says that they said that it was because she was from out of town that they did the drug test, but she thinks it was the color of her skin. And it ended up being a false positive. But in the meantime, it led to this very kind of humiliating CPS investigation in which they interrogated her other children and checked their bodies and didn't let her be alone with her newborn child. And so, even when it's an investigation that doesn't last very long, it can be very humiliating and devastating and intrusive.
So for the families that are investigated, how many of them are found to actually how many of those families are actually found to be guilty, for lack of a better word, of mistreatment or maltreatment toward their children?
Agnell, I think you'd be good to answer that.
Yeah. So we'll look at Maricopa County, where Phoenix is, the story kind of centered on. So among the children that were investigated or experienced an investigation in that 5-year period, about 17% had at least one substantiated allegation, which basically means that the caseworkers believed there was evidence that maltreatment occurred. That's already a subset, a fairly small subset of the children that get brought into the system. But when you look specifically at allegations of physical or sexual abuse, it's just 2% of the children that were investigated during that time period who actually had evidence that they were physically or sexually abused during that time period. So a very, very small subset of the children brought into the system experience any form of what the state terms maltreatment, but even fewer experience what we would commonly think of as abuse.
I have to ask, where is this mandatory reporting going on mostly in the schools? I'm trying to understand what is happening, Eli, that would cause that kind of reporting that ultimately ends up being unfounded. Agnell mentioned of physical or sexual abuse. I mean, what are these reporters seeing, the people who are reporting this, that makes them think there's some type of physical sexual abuse going on when they're for only 2%, it's only happening for 2%, or it's only exists for 2%, such a small number?
Yeah, well, I mean, 3 of the main groups of mandatory reporters are teachers or, school professionals. So, and teachers have a very low rate of, allegations that they may being substantiated. They don't necessarily know what's going on at home, but they might see like a bruise or something, or they might think that the child looks malnourished or is falling asleep in class, like they don't have anywhere to sleep at home or something. And they, because of the law, as Agnell pointed out, they feel this kind of like legal responsibility to call in and say that they have a concern about this child, even though the bruise could have been from, playing with the cat or dog, or the, being tired could have just been from staying up late watching TV or so teachers are a big source. Medical professionals and in Arizona and elsewhere are a large source of these allegations, including, kind of the drug testing issue I mentioned with new mothers. Police and law enforcement are a big source of the allegations that come in. They might arrest a Black parent for something and then call DCS because that Black parent is in jail for the night, and then it becomes a child removal, and it lasts a long time. Those are 3 base sources. It should also be noted though that people can call in anonymously, which is one of what some critics would say a flaw of the system, that a mother's former abuser, or just an ex in general, or a neighbor who has a grudge. Those kinds of people can call in and say, like, I think this person is being abusive, and they don't have to say who they are. So that's a source of some of the reports as well.
I'm also would be curious for an answer to this. We're talking about Black children. Are these teachers doing this mandatory reporting? What is their background in race? Are we talking about white teachers? We're talking about Black teachers? Do we know?
I don't think we ever did a breakdown of the race of teachers in Phoenix, but the city as a whole is about 7% Black, and it's a lower percentage Black population than many other large cities in the country. And one of the results of that, I mean, Phoenix generally is a very sprawling, kind of spread out area. But for the Black community in particular, according to a lot of the interviews we did, people feel kind of very surrounded by white people here. And so, white teachers, white doctors, white people, white neighbors who could call DCS on them. And so it's kind of a very isolating experience.
So are these Black families and Black parents living under fear, would you say, Agnell?
That's certainly what reporting that Eli and I and our colleagues at NBC, I think showed there's what we termed a community-wide dread associated with these sorts of cases, and what some have referred to as a generational curse. So it's something that it seems like a lot of these families carry with them.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, like it's both this fear because these investigations are so common that you kind of never know when the next knock on the door is going to be, but it's also a disbelief, right? That was something that was expressed a lot. Like, how could it be possible for the state government to come into our private lives this often and potentially remove our children? Kind of a disbelief. But because there's such a stigma around being investigated by child services, what we also found in our reporting is that even though it is so common, people were also feeling kind of lonely in the experience. There weren't a lot of outlets to share that they had gone through this. There weren't a lot of ways to organize around it because there's a lot of stigma about just even admitting that you had this particular agency look into your family life.
I'd also be curious to know the state, because we know that this is a problem in many school systems, especially after the pandemic, the availability, or the state or the availability of counselors in the schools for young people, because this is double layer. Kids need counseling anyway. But then if you're going to be stigmatized by this experience and be threatened to be under investigation and perhaps taken away from home, then you need counseling and therapy for that disproportionately. So, I don't even know how how one begins to climb out of that deep hole under these circumstances. Are there any members of the community organizing, families, parents trying to push back against this?
Yes, definitely. I think especially in the last few years, that stigma that I was talking about, people have been a little bit more able to move past it and share their experiences and kind of realize together how common this is and unite a little bit more around the experience. And so there's a couple of community organizations, like there's one called Our Sister, Our Brother, which was founded actually by somebody who used to be a caseworker for DCS, but realized what a problem the racial disparity was and left the job to kind of work on the problem from the outside. And he has now been organizing parents across the Phoenix metro area who have gone through this. And they've held, meetings and rallies, and now they're meeting with DCS more regularly. And DCS is, it appears making an effort to try to fix this problem. They've taken some initial steps, training their workers in different ways to make sure they understand the systemic causes of racial inequity. They're trying to make sure that somebody of the same race is present upon their initial contact with a family, somebody who's trusted, maybe a friend or a neighbor or clergy. And so they are taking some steps, but it's been driven by their community action, I would say. The advocacy has pushed DCS to really take this issue seriously.
Agnell, what's next, or is there a next when it comes to your reporting? Are you all going to be following up on this story, doing more investigating?
Yeah, so this was part of a year-long series that we've done, and we've got at least one more story that we're trying to get out. We've been trying to tackle kind of the various aspects of the child welfare system in the country, from those mandatory reporters that we were talking about all the way through, the most extreme outcome that can happen in the system, which is the loss of parental rights. So we're going to continue definitely looking into this, I think even beyond this year. So there's a lot of things to dig into. I think kind of the interesting thing, kind of going back to your last question, it seemed like, I think within the Black community, I get the sense that this has been known about for a long time, but there seems to be kind of a greater awareness nationally about how many parallels there are between the child welfare system and the criminal justice system. And we're talking about a lot of the same sorts of things, the pervasive nature of it in certain communities, especially within the Black community. And, our series has tried to look at this system through that lens. And I think it's been very instructive for us. And we're hoping to kind of carry that lens through, because it does, offer a different perspective on a system that many people don't necessarily think of as being an extension of the criminal justice system, but in many ways is more powerful and acts, very similarly.
Yeah, very, very powerful point. Criminalization is criminalization is criminalization. And this is another aspect of it, folks. Surveillance is surveillance is surveillance. And that's why we like ProPublica, because they take the time to do this and cover this type of information and expose these stories. As just to recap, I want people to get the full impact of this. 1 of every 3 Black children in Maricopa County, where Phoenix is, families under investigation. By the time Black children in Maricopa County turn 18, there's a 63% chance that they will see their parents investigated by child services, the highest rate of any of the 20 largest counties in the nation. For every 100 African-American kids in Maricopa County, 63 will experience this type of child family services investigation. For every 100 white kids in Maricopa County, 33 will experience this type of investigation. For the Black kids, for the 63 that will experience it out of the 100, 19 will be placed in foster care. The parents of 6 of these kids will have their parental rights terminated. For the 33 out of 100 white kids in Maricopa County, 8 of the 33 kids will be placed in foster care. And only 3 of those kids' parents will have their parental rights terminated. Too much, too high. These things are important. And that's, again, why we talk about, we just had these midterms. We talk about down ballot. This is at the local level. So when we vote for local officials and state officials, these type of things we need to know, the type of information we need to have. And ProPublica always does right by us by sharing this type of information so we can know this. So folks, please check out this article, share it with others at ProPublica.org. Links will be available to you wherever you are listening to us right now. I want to thank my guests, Agnel, Philip, and Eli Hager, for taking this very important story on. Thank you to you both.
Thank you as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. As always, perform an act of kindness on behalf of an elder or young person. Write a letter to a sister brother who just so happens to find her or himself incarcerated. Offer libations to the ancestors upon whose sturdy shoulders we all now stand. And above all, give thanks to the God of your understanding by whatever name you call her and him. All God asks of us is that we give each other love. Thanks for giving MIP love. And please remember to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.